Solar PV Cast by Shift, a podcast exploring solar energy and the role it plays in improving our lives and our planet. Here's your host, Chris Palliser.
Yes, it's another episode of the Solar PV Cast. It's brought to you by Shift. For all your solar and energy storage needs, make sure to visit shift.ca. Now, the pros far outweigh the cons when it comes to going solar, but there are some cons, and one of them being recycling of panels. It is cheaper to just chuck them in the landfill, but of course that is so bad for the environment. That's not what we want. Our guest today is addressing that very problem and finding a lot of success with it. I'm really excited to have on the program CEO and owner Green Clean Solar LLC, Emilie O'Leary. Emilie, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Nice to be here. Thank you for your invitation.
Just start, if you wouldn't mind, just giving us a little bit about yourself, a little background. How did you get into solar? How long you've been in the game?
Absolutely. So I've been in solar since 2016. And during that time, I had another business where we were mechanical installers. So our niche in the market was building solar carports, rooftops, and solar farms. So we were able to travel all over the country, building these commercial size projects. And we were fortunate to work on some of the largest rooftops, some of the largest military bases, universities, had my GC license in 5 different states. So that's how I really got to learn solar, is being out in the field and really seeing what it takes to build these type of projects. So fast forward, we decided to sell the business in January of 2020 and sold it to an oil and pipeline gas individual who wanted to get out of that space and get into renewables. And so I stayed on as the CEO for 2 years. And during that time, we started to go after utility scale projects. So we're looking at 50, 60, 100 megawatt projects. Big difference than what we were doing before. And as I mentioned, I like to have boots on the ground. I would go out, look at the job sites, and see the massive amount of waste that was happening at these job sites. And it's just the nature of the job. You know, you have tons and tons of packaging that comes with all the solar panels. And then you have tons and tons of broken panels that comes from installation, from the time they come off the trucks. Some of them are broken. You move them from the trucks to the laydown yard area, and then you move them into the site. So there's many multiple points of where these glass panels can get broken. So I realized, there's quite a bit of broken solar panels when you're on a job site of this magnitude, and nobody knew what to do with it, and we didn't want to throw them in the landfill. But we didn't really have much choices because there wasn't very many options out there. So we were guilty of throwing not just the panels away, but a lot of the waste, the cardboard, the plastic, the metal. We were in a very remote, I'm thinking of a specific project here, but we were in a very remote site and very, very limited resources. So that really motivated me to realize that we can't be the only company that's having this problem in our industry. And I would talk to other colleagues and they had the same issue too. So fast forward again, I got out of that business and started Green Clean Solar in February of 2022, and just said, you know what, I've got to find a solution for all this waste. And so for over 2.5 years, we have found solutions. We have gotten partners. We have done a lot of research in this area when it comes to recycling. And it's interesting because right around the same time I started my business, others were starting businesses with very innovative technology that could support this big problem in our industry. So we've collaborated. We have probably one of the largest database in the United States because we work all over the country doing these type of projects. And what makes sense is to find partners near those sites because we don't want to haul it state to state, which sometimes we actually have to do because there's no local support recycler in that area. So it's been really exciting journey. I absolutely love what I do. Every week or every day we get new jobs with new material that we have to find a solution for. And we really do. We have been able to find some very creative options and different price points too, because a lot of times people want to do the right thing, but they didn't allocate certain funds to recycle. And as you said before, you know, it's more expensive than throwing it in the landfill because you have manpower that has to go pick up the panels. You have to have consumables, you have to have trucks, and then you have to transport it to the facility, and they have manpower, equipment, and very expensive equipment. So there is a lot of cost to recycling solar panels, and it's growing, and I'm seeing a lot of very innovative technology from all over Europe and Asia that want to get into this space here in the United States because they know there's a lot of opportunities here. So I'm getting calls all the time that want to partner with me with this technology. So that gives you kind of an overview of where I was and what I'm doing today.
What got you into solar initially? Before you started that, was it just thought this is the way of the future? I want to get in on this. How did that? Have you just been following the solar world?
No, absolutely no. It's crazy because I have a background. Actually, I studied fashion in my undergraduate degree, and then I got my master's degree in business. And I've always been an entrepreneur. So I had a consulting business for many years, and I worked with a gentleman here in Atlanta, Georgia, that had a commercial business. And so we partnered, and I was supporting his business, and he started to get into solar.
Hmm.
And so this was back in 2014, 2015, and I saw the increase of solar projects with his business. And I was like, this is really booming. And so we had a great talk as far as what we wanted to do in the future. And I kind of saw this increase. And I said, hey, let's start a business that's all we do is focus on solar. So back in 2016, January 4th is when I came up with the LLC and just dove into it. I didn't know what a skid steer was. I didn't know much about the solar system and how it operated. I mean, I was learning, but started to go to a lot of trade shows. And we had one here in Atlanta and handed out business cards. And we got awarded a very big, high profile project in downtown Atlanta, which is they were building the new Falcon Stadium, well, the Mercedes building. And a component of that was to have a renewable carport. So we got awarded to build that solar
Oh,
carport.
wow.
And it was beautiful. Like I drive by there now and I'm like so proud because I'm like, it's still functioning. It still looks good. And
Yeah.
there was a lot of lessons learned from building that site, but that really opened the door. So,
Wow.
when we
That's
did a good
cool.
job, we started to travel all over the country doing other jobs like that.
I remember reading about top 10 stadiums in the U.S. that use solar power, and I believe that was one of them. It was the carport over the yeah. That's really cool. I didn't know that. Well, congrats to all your success in that and this journey so far. Now, obviously, a female, a woman, in kind of a male-dominated industry. What was that part like for you?
Well, I started cussing more. I only say that because, when you're in the construction industry, um, it can be very rough. I went from corporate America with suits and high heels to work boots to khaki pants and using porta potties. I mean, there's no glamour in the
Right.
construction industry. So I had a couple people tell me, Emily, if you're going to get into this, you need to have tough skin. And I realized that. But I don't take things personally. I've seen it all, I've heard it all. I've been cussed at, and I just kind of, let it go through one ear and out the other, but I can stand with them all. So, you know, I would still say, 90% of my phone calls today are with men. Very few are women owned businesses. I know a handful, and I'm so excited that they're in this space, but it still needs to expand. And, I've got women working for me right now, and I think we're really good with multitasking. We also see a lot of projects in a different perspective and how we can do things. So I can go to a job and I'll be like, you know what, we need to try this. And typically it works better that way. So I love to see women in this space, but it is challenging because, some men are not used to showing up, having a woman on site, and they're like, well, who's the boss? And I'm like, well, that's me. That's who you're going to have to talk to. So again, it's all good. I love what I do. And there's good times and there's challenging times for sure.
Are you seeing, I mean, you said 90% of your conversations are still with men, but are you seeing more and more women, maybe at trade shows and other events, enter the world of solar?
For sure. I really do. And I would say probably in the last 5 years, it has started to create more interest for women because of these new jobs. So, for example, 5 years ago, you never heard of director of sustainability. Like, that's a very new job title in our industry. And I'm seeing a lot of women hold those positions. And I love that because they can bring a lot of their experience from other work experience into that role. I'm seeing women in project management roles where they are tasked to see and execute projects from the very beginning to the end. I'm seeing women at trade shows that represent manufacturing, whether it's the manufacturing of solar panels, inverters, um, batteries. I'm seeing a lot of women in that role as well, being sales reps. I have very good friends that have gone completely from a different industry into those roles. So it's increasing a lot. So I'm really excited about that, and I love to mentor. I'll give you one example. I'm working with the University of Georgia. This is my second year where there's been women in their senior capstone classes wanting to get into this space. So I've been working with them on different opportunities. So I like to, encourage them because it can be very intimidating, especially if you don't know much about the solar industry. They're like, we have no idea, but I didn't either. I mean, listen, if I came from a fashion background and if I can do it, anybody can.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, and congrats to you on being a bit of a pioneer in that space. And like you said, just anyone can do it. You just buckle down and do it. So that's really cool. I love having conversations with anyone in the United States in general, really, because in Canada, where we're based, the podcast, the United States is kind of like our crystal ball when it comes to solar. We're 5, 6, 7 years behind the United States. And so it's pretty cool to kind of see that growth happen for, 2015, 2016. They're putting it on big stadiums, obviously the Atlanta Falcons. And we don't have any stadiums with solar yet, but we're heading that way. And the same thing is for energy storage. We look at California a lot. So, yeah, I mean, what about the industry as a whole in Georgia? It's obviously booming still.
It is. So what's interesting about Georgia is a couple things. I have obviously done quite a bit of work in Georgia, but most of my work is outside of Georgia. And and a couple of reasons why I would say South Georgia, we have a lot of cotton fields, a lot of peanut farms, and it's been saturated with utility scale projects. And what's happening is, from my understanding, is the grid is getting maxed out with so much solar. So I was down South Georgia about a month ago collecting solar panels and working with a good client and getting them recycled. And we had to bring them There wasn't anything in South Georgia. I mean, when it comes to recycling, very limited resources. So that's the other challenging thing is that, when all this boom of solar, you have to have a lot of land, which means a lot of space, but there's, your mom and pop shops. And if I go to them and I'm like, hey, we have thousands and thousands of wooden pallets that we need recycled. They're like, well, we'll take 100. We can't take that many. So anyhow, Georgia is still booming. I think there's a lot of really key players here in the state when it comes to solar. We have Q Cells, which many of you may know if you're listening. It's, I think, the number one North America solar manufacturer. And they just expanded their facility in North Georgia. So we're really happy to have them. SK Batteries is a huge manufacturing facility here. So our governor really supports innovation, technology. I know there's some really good tax advantages for some of these big time international companies coming to the US, and they pick Georgia. So it's growing in that fact. But I do see a lot of needs outside of Georgia. And so we go where the work is. And we've gone, as far as Hawaii, Puerto Rico, California, Texas, up to Maine, New York, Ohio. Like we go everywhere. So
Potentially Canada.
yes. And so I really want to, and actually we have a project that we're working on right now, where we're trying to get the panels out of Canada to one of our partners to get recycled. So we're working on the logistics and the border and what all that entails. So we don't get tariffs and taxes on kind of scrap panels because they're not coming to the US to get resold. So there's things that we have to find out. But I will tell you, Chris, my ultimate goal is to bring resources to Canada where we can do what we're doing here in the US. I mean, it's just a matter of getting a good location, getting support, because these things are not cheap. So we need funding. And I'm sure there's organizations and government funding or grants that can support these kind of initiatives. So it takes time, though. These things don't happen overnight, but I'm the type of person that I like to see things get done. So I can move quickly.
Yeah, well, and again, the recycling of solar is not something major happening because again, we're kind of, 5 years behind where the United States is. I think I read the US government invested something like $82 million into figuring out recycling of solar panels last year, a couple years ago. Whereas that's not really a thing yet on the radar. Right now, we're looking at rebates and support incentives to get people to install solar, but it's kind of like a few years are going to go by and all of a sudden everyone's going to be looking at each other being like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, now we got to figure out what to do now because now we got so many panels out there. So it is happening in the sub provinces that have started some free recycling programs, like pilot programs. But yeah, there is an incredible opportunity. And obviously that's why Green Clean is having so much success because you're answering what is, a negative of going solar is what do we do with the panels after the fact?
Well, that and also, we've been kind of focusing on the broken panels from installation, but one pillar of my business is the decommissioning end of life. So we do have to start thinking long term because some of these sites that we're going to now, Chris, they're only 10 or 12 years old. They're not being in operation 25 years, which is typically the warranty of the panels. They're getting taken down sooner than later.
Interesting. And why is that?
Well, there's a couple reasons. I think they did their job, like they generated the energy that they expected when they put these panels out there. Some of the cables, like I was on a job site last week on a rooftop and, having cables in the elements for a decade, they kind of start to crumble, like it was kind of, I mean, this was a really solid system. Like it was beautifully done, but you really start to see a lot of wear and tear. And the panels wattage were like 220,
Right.
and they're producing 600 watts right now.
Yeah.
And when you think, well, let's repower them. And these companies are like, no, we don't want to repower because that means newer inverters, newer cables, newer everything, And sometimes the racking that was installed a decade ago, they're not necessarily going to be able
Mm-hmm.
to handle the new panels.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the reasons that I'm seeing that they're coming down. The purchase power agreements are done, and they're done. They just want them
Interesting.
out. And this is happening on big corporation buildings, schools, like, ones that were really innovative a decade ago, and they were like, hey, let's do this. Now they're like, we're done. We're done with it.
Right. Well, and to your point, the efficiency of or the wattage of the panels. Yeah, 10 years ago it was 225 or whatever, and like you said, so now it's 600. So financially, it probably makes sense to just rip everything out, and if you're going to do it again, put in a brand new setup to go another 15 years or whatever you have. And there's something that happened actually in Alberta, in the province of Alberta in Canada, was they put a moratorium on large scale solar. Alberta's kind of like the Wild West of energy. It's our Texas, if you will. And so all of a sudden people are popping solar farms on all this farmland and things like that. And they kind of said, whoa, hold on, we're going to pause this because we need to come up with a plan for end of life. Because, of course, in Alberta, everyone, it was oil country. And now there's a whole bunch of abandoned oil derricks just strewn all about the province. And everyone's kind of like, oh, yeah, it's not our problem. Kind of looking the other way, right? So they want to make sure the same thing doesn't happen with solar farms. So, interesting to your point here about the large scale solar farms and what they're looking at. But then again, shout out to Green Clean for solving this problem, right?
Well, I appreciate that. That's nice for you to say because, when there's a problem and nobody wants to come up with a solution, you'll see those vacant, whether it's the oil machines or whatever, that people won't know what to do. And what's also interesting is that, one of the goals that I'm trying to do is, obviously sell my services, but educate people, because if you don't educate them, then they're not going to know what to do. And it's interesting because I've been getting phone calls from projects that we did years ago. They're like, Emilie, we just saw, I'm trying to be on social media and I put posts on what we do because they're like, we didn't even know this was an option. And so I go back to the field, and these panels have literally been sitting on the field for years, and they're covered with water, like debris, weeds. At one of the sites had this huge wasp nest. I mean, you obviously can tell that they have been there for years.
Nobody
But it's
wanted
like,
to make the decision.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're
what
like,
do you do?
we didn't know what to do with them, so we just
Yeah.
left them here. I mean, they've got a great system producing energy in the back, but all these leftover panels. So I'm really trying to get the word out, like, hey, call us, because, what we do is we offer a full service turnkey, meaning it's not just the panels, those broken batteries, the inverters. Like, we did a power system out of Miami where we recycled over 5,000 lithium ion batteries that was taking down. But it had been sitting there because they had no idea how to process it. Because I will tell you, it's not easy, and most of these companies that are building solar, like, that's their strong point. They're not in the back trying to research and find out, hey, who can take this? Who can take that? Like, that's what we do. And that's what my team does. And it can take weeks for us to find the haulers, the recyclers, the trucking companies, but we put all that together and we're like, okay, we can solve your problem, but it takes time to figure all that out.
Do you find that people are now willing to spend the money necessary to do this rather than just truck it to the landfill and be done with it? They're whether it's public pressure or education, do you find that they're willing to spend the money to pay for your services?
Well, the good thing is I've been in business for 2.5 years
So
because these clients have found money, right,
Yeah,
to pay
yeah.
for these services. So it's like a pull and a tug type of deal. Like, there's some companies when we send them an estimate, they're sticker shock or
Right.
they go to crickets. Like, what happened?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I think some of them don't expect some of these costs. And the good thing is we can say, hey, let us help you. If you have a budget, we'll work with you, because we have so many different options when it comes to recycling, and they all have different equipment. They all have different processes. So one company may charge this and another company may charge this. So we really try to work with them and their budget. So the good thing is I think, in certain parts of the country, especially the Northeast, they will fine them, the county, if they don't get rid of those panels. Like, I had a call one day and the guy was like, we need you here tomorrow because they're going to charge us $10,000 a fee if we don't move these panels. So of course we get our team together and we made it happen. But I do see some of the counties charging a very high fee if they don't do it. So this is another thing, going back
Yeah.
to educating our clients, is like, look, you got to build this into your project. You've got to definitely earmark money to recycling these panels or the end of life. And another
Right.
thing we're getting calls on is they can't even get permits unless they get a end of life proposal. And those are one things that we're actually starting to develop a very comprehensive report on end of life. Like, I mean, nobody knows exactly what the cost is going to be in 20 years, but we have really good estimates that we can show you. Here's the cost, kind of what we are paying for today. So, there's going to be money that's going to have to be earmarked for these type of projects.
Yeah, and you're so right. We think, oh, these things will last 25, 30 years. We don't have to think about it, but we do, and so we have to start being proactive. It's interesting that the local governments are, that's something maybe Alberta's looking at doing, where it's like, okay, great, we support this, but we need to see a plan on what you're doing with this when it's done.
Well,
Um,
and here's another point I'll make with that. So there was a state government that called me and they said, Emily, we're mandating this. And I said, oh, great, more recycling of these solar panels. Well, guess what the problem was? These clients who had to recycle these panels, they're calling me. They're like, Emily, there's no place to recycle these
right.
panels. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So why would they implement this mandatory when there's no back end support, right? So we
That's
had to
government.
transport these panels like to another state to get them recycled.
Right.
So I'm telling these legislation, I'm like, hey, I love the mandatory recycling, but look, before you do all this, please have some resources in your backyard that can accommodate that. Because if you can't do that, nobody knows how to manage this.
Yeah. I mean, that's a familiar problem as well in solar. It's still so new, and there's a lot of governments still trying to work their way through what this renewable energy world looks like. And so it kind of makes sense that, it's backwards, but sometimes that's how the government works.
Yeah. And you probably have heard stories, share a little bit about the wind industry, right? Like the wind turbine blades. I know that's big up in Canada. And they didn't know what to do with those blades. So they started to bury them, you
Mm.
know, and they just didn't know. So that's another industry that's starting to explode with options of recycling those wind turbine blades. So I'm really excited about that. We're starting to get involved with that as well too. But again, if people don't know what to do with it, they're just going to be like, we'll figure out something
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. What happens to, like, do you ever think we'll get to a place where we no longer need to mine for these materials? Like, when a panel is recycled, does it go back to more panels? Like, what happens in that part of the process?
Well, that's a good question, Chris, because there are recycling companies that have equipment now that can take out the copper, take out the silver. They can melt the aluminum frames. They can purify the glass. and then they'll sell those back into the solar industry. So I'm starting to see that happening. But what's interesting is I also am starting to see a lot of the recycling companies that have been processing electronics for decades, right? They're like, hey, we want to get into this market. So a lot of their downstream buyers are wanting certain components of the panels, So let's say their buyers have been in the automotive industry. Well, they may extract certain components of the panels that support their downstreams. I know for batteries, for example, when we send the batteries to a recycler, they turn components of the battery into black mass, which then goes to produce new batteries. So it really all depends on the recycler and their downstreams and what they sell it to. Because I think that's really where they're making their money. They're not really making the money up front. They're really making the money on the back end.
Right. And all parts of a panel can be recycled?
Yes, from my understanding,
Yeah.
yes. And again, it all depends on the equipment. And every equipment's different. And I'm seeing a lot of these equipments are coming from Korea, Thailand, China. I think those are the three main countries. And, they are doing a lot in Asia and they're doing a lot of recycling in Europe. So, kind of what you were sharing, Chris, before, how you think Canada's behind the US. Well, the US is really behind the recycling of panels from Europe. Like they've been doing this for decades. So, I'm seeing a lot of this new technology that's coming into the US that can hopefully recycle everything from the panels. But here's the challenging thing. There are dozens and dozens of different type of panels, right? And that's the other thing. We're seeing new manufacturing of panels come into the US. And guess what? Their spec sheets is completely different than the next spec sheets that I get.
Right.
So I am seeing dozens and dozens of spec sheets, and they all have different elements in them. So those are things that we have to work with because some equipment are like, we can't take those. 100%, we can't take those. So then we have to find another recycler that can take those type of elements. So
Yeah.
I'm telling
Wow.
you, it's a challenge.
Yeah. Other challenges that you're finding in this world that you're now in. Anything else that jumps out?
Um, I would say that, you know, there's a lot of myths in our industry. And, I am not an expert. I don't have a PhD in a lot of this stuff. So, I hear stuff, I participate things. I'm speakers at a lot of events. So I'm hearing a lot of different stories. And sometimes that gets trickled out to the field or to consumers or to businesses. And so there's just a lot of noise and a lot of stories that I'm like, where did you get this from? Like I'm out in the field. I see this stuff, so there's a lot of marketing and a lot of PR from companies that I'm like, what are they doing?
Right.
Because, my crew and my team, we are literally out in the field doing this every day. And so when I hear things like this, I'm like, I'm just like, oh goodness,
Yeah.
this is not good.
Well, that's
So
the education element that you spoke to earlier, right?
it is. It is. And it's interesting because it's not just happening in the US, but I'm also getting calls. I've been invited to a big recycling convention in Italy coming up here. And, they have no idea of the challenges that happens with the solar growth, right? Like, everybody has funding and money to pour into this and they build and build. And I will tell you one example. When I went to speak in Puerto Rico, they've got these great goals by 2030 or 2040. They want to be 100% renewable. And so I'm up there and I'm telling them these stories. I said, well, Puerto Rico being an island, I said, we did this project and supported this in Hawaii, in Maui. And I said, we had to process 93,000 boxes, that came in from a cargo ship. And they were like, oh, we've never thought about all this, and I'm like, this is a big problem, not just for the islands, but the landfill is overwhelmed with all this waste. So I have to tell them, like, I love that you're supporting all this growth, but are you thinking about all the waste that's coming from all these projects? And they look at me like, oh my gosh, And then the other side of it is I go to these waste recycling companies or conventions, because I used to be going to solar all the time, but now I'm going to these waste recycling companies, and I'm talking to the Glass Institute of America. I'm talking to the metal associations. I'm like, do you realize how much waste is coming from the solar industry? And they're like, we had no idea, So again, I'm really trying to blend the waste, the recycling industries together to start talking. Because when I was talking to the Glass Institute America, I'm like, would you take solar panel glass? And they're like, because I'm sure that they've processed Coca-Cola bottles for decades, right? Like they know how to process Coca-Cola bottles, but they've never processed solar panel glass, right? So there's a lot of education and research that has to be done on both ends.
It's kind of society is in general. We're all so focused on getting that thing. We never think about what we're going to do with that thing after. We just go on Amazon and click add to cart, add to cart, add to cart, and then we don't think about anything after that. So yeah, it's like an uphill battle, but a battle that needs to be talked about on platforms like the podcast and wherever you can.
That's exactly cool. Right. Yes. No, I really do enjoy, Chris, doing these podcasts because, you have audiences, I have audiences, and the more people can hear of these conversations, I think it's going to help be a win-win situation because, I don't have a brick and mortar store that people can drive by and stop in and ask questions, so social media, podcast, this is such the wave of the future to get this information out into our industry.
Well, and it's the same thing, honestly, when you go solar, the big thing we talk about is the best way to save money is to use less energy. And it applies on the back end as well. Use less waste, use less to create less waste. So kind of a full circle moment. Well, this has been a great conversation, Emilie. Thank you so much. Emilie O'Leary, CEO of Green Clean Solar, speaking to us from Georgia. And one question, how do you see the future of solar and I guess specifically recycling? Where do you see it going in 10 years?
It's going to keep growing. I mean, the conversations and, the clients that we have, we used to talk about megawatts. Now I have clients that are saying, hey, we have a gigawatt of portfolio. So it's just going to grow. It's going to keep growing and growing. There's funding there. I talk to a lot of financial institutions and they have money sitting there to give to all these installers and developers. So I just see that this is an industry that there's going to be amazing job growth, expanding in areas, that we had never seen before. So that's my take on the solar. And then as far as recycling, I know 100% that it is going to just grow as well. Like the conversations that I've been having, especially with all this technology that wants to come into the US, and they know there's literally case studies that will show how many panels are going to have to retire in, X amount of years. So there's companies out there that are doing a lot of R&D right now, literally right now, to be prepared for that snowball or this avalanche of solar panels.
Yeah. Well, and we have to look at what's existing already, because at some point we're still mining, and that's going to run out at some point. And obviously we need to do our part for climate change. And so 100% it makes sense. Yeah. That's really interesting. And as the industry grows, we want to see more women.
That's right. Bring them on.
That's right. I love it. Well, Emilie, thank you so much again for joining the Solar PV Cast. Once again, this is Emilie O'Leary from Green Clean Solar. Website. Give us the website.
It's simple. greenclean-solar.com.
There it is. Perfect.
And follow me on LinkedIn too, because I put a lot of pictures and stories up there as well. In
fact, shout out to your LinkedIn, because that's how a friend of mine, a colleague was mine, you should chat to Emilie. She's great on LinkedIn. So shout out to Steve, and then shout out for you for joining us. Thanks again, Emilie.
Thank you. Have a great day.
The Solar PV Cast by Shift with Chris Palliser. To begin your solar journey, visit shift.ca.